Hello and welcome to 21st Century. I'm Daljit Dhaliwal. It's one of the most lucrative businesses in the world, generating billions of dollars while destroying millions of lives. It trades in the most precious commodity, human beings, many of whom end up as sex slaves. We follow an extraordinary woman dedicated to stopping human trafficking, or as she calls it, this modern-day slavery.
If you're not bold, if you're not courageous, you can't even do this work.
Just because they have no document and they just brought them here for no reasons. You understand? We are not criminals. We are not hoodlums.
I don't think about threats and fears. There are times they advise you don't go here because it's not safe. Sometimes we do listen. Sometimes we go on our own. So far, we've survived all of that, and I'm grateful to God.
Joy Ngozi Izilo steps into worlds she wishes she didn't have to.
The room we went before, at the beginning.
At this immigration detention center in Turin, Italy, she meets victims of a heinous trade who all too often are detained and penalized by the same authorities that should be protecting them.
Yeah, so you were 18 when you came. I found young girls, I've seen victims, the whole family in traffic. And when you look at them, and then you know that there are many more undiscovered. We know we have had transatlantic slavery, and that ended over 200 years ago, that now we have new forms of slavery, and human trafficking is part of that. Human trafficking is a modern-day slavery.
Joy, from Nigeria, is an attorney and a university professor tasked by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to examine the global trafficking of human beings. As an independent expert, she works without pay and at times at great personal risk. Now, at the invitation of the Italian government, she's on a 10-day visit, traveling the country to meet women and girls, victims of trafficking, as well as the concerned authorities. Italy is a favoured destination for people from Africa, Eastern Europe and Asia, fleeing poverty and conflict and in search of a better life.
They think it's a land of honey and milk, and they think it's filled with gold, and they fill the dollars and the pounds. But that's far from reality.
Such unrealistic expectations are leaving many at risk and vulnerable to human traffickers. Young women like Pamela from Nigeria.
The man that told me that her sister in Europe, in Italy, need a babysitter was a friend to my sister.
Pamela trusted the family friend who promised her a well-paying nanny job, a work visa and a plane ticket to Italy. The cost, €35,000 to be deducted from her future wages. But instead, Pamela, along with 150 others, was crammed into a caravan of trucks crossing the Sahara and then onto a boat to Europe. Lampedusa, Italy, often considered the gateway for migrants headed to Europe. Tens of thousands of desperate people arrive here every year, and many others die trying. In October 2013, more than 300 migrants drowned when their overcrowded boat capsized, one of the deadliest incidents on recent record.
Watching what happened in Lampedusa and looking at corpses recently being marked 1, 2, 3 coffins is really sad. Watching that on CNN, I wept.
But 5 years earlier, Pamela was one of the ones who made it. She was interviewed by immigration authorities.
When I was in Lampedusa, when I was arrested the first time, the second time, the third time, nobody ever told me I have the right to ask for a staying paper or permission to stay in the country. Nobody.
Had she been asked the right questions, she could have been identified as a victim of traffickers and under Italian law would have been afforded protection. But like so many, she slipped through, her plight undetected.
What's missing is the ability to identify victims because they are not plainly visible. They don't have "I am a victim of trafficking" written on their foreheads.
Guido Savio is an immigration defense lawyer. He recognizes that the authorities, overwhelmed by the sheer number of hopeful migrants and crippling lack of funds, may leave trafficking victims unprotected.
Because of the economic crisis, the Italian authorities and the people who work in this field have less and less resources. In Italy, there's quite a good law against trafficking. But not all police who handle that first approach receive training in how to recognize victims of trafficking.
They don't take them through a protocol or checklist. They move them like cargo to another point, and that point is a detention camp.
And this is exactly what happened to Pamela. From the detention centre, she called the only number she had and was picked up by the woman who she'd been told in Nigeria would be her employer. And an even more terrifying journey began.
My first day at work, I went to hide. I just went in a corner to stay. I cried. I just hide because I've never done such a thing before in my life.
Pamela's work was selling her body on the streets for sex, all to pay back the exorbitant €35,000 fee her employer had up-fronted for the journey. Tricked by the traffickers with false promises of new lives, Pamela's predicament, like that of thousands like her, went undetected.
The police don't even ask themselves if that woman on the street could be a victim of trafficking. And they don't realize that by not asking these questions, they violate international treaties that outline protocols for identifying victims.
And this is happening not only in Italy, but in countries around the world. It's one of the main factors that allows the traffickers to stay in business.
Yeah, people are enslaved in homes, in the sex industry, in hospitality industry, in factories. They shouldn't be criminalized. They should be provided assistance that is not conditional. Because once they identify a traffic person, a different set of rules should apply. It is important to join efforts in investigation that will help to unmask the gangs, criminal gangs that are behind this, because that is the problem.
But breaking this lucrative trade in humans is not easy. In 2005, it was estimated to be a $32 billion global industry, with 2.4 million people caught in this modern-day slave trade. Numbers now feared to be many times higher.
And these are kind of things that drives me, to act, to really see what change we can. It is commitment, not just to humanity, and commitment to the victims of trafficking, because when you think that some of them will never be discovered alive, or some of their parents, they wouldn't know exactly what happened to them.
And trying to make sure no parent ever has to go through that is one of the drivers of Joy's work as the Human Rights Special Rapporteur on Trafficking. Each year, she delivers detailed reports to the United Nations Human Rights Council or to the General Assembly, sharing findings and making practical recommendations to combat human trafficking.
Trafficking in persons requires a multilateral and multidisciplinary response, and no single country or entity can combat it alone.
Following the 15-country visits since she took up her mandate, Joy has seen some successes.
I've been to countries where there was no law, and at the end of the day, they came up with a law. So I'm happy about that. I met a lot of victims.
But there's still a long way to go. Simply having a law is not enough. It must be implemented.
The government has a primary obligation to protect everyone within their territory and jurisdiction.
In Italy, Joy and her team meet to discuss these issues with representatives of the government, the authorities, and trafficking victim support groups.
You have to make sure you have statistics. How many people are trafficked? What sort of trafficking is prevalent? Where is the problem coming from? And then you map it out, who will be doing this training, the police, immigration, who will be doing that.
She also met with the survivors themselves, like these women at one of the government-funded shelters. They were identified by the authorities and were given the protection and assistance that was their legal right.
How much did you want to pay them back before they released you?
I paid 30,000 euro.
Once someone is identified as a trafficked person, Italy provides the best victims assistance in Europe. Since 1999, more than 26,000 have been supported and helped to escape from their traffickers. When Pamela finally plucked up the courage to escape from her enslavement, her freedom was short-lived. She was almost immediately arrested by the police for lack of papers and taken to another detention centre in Turin, where again she was not recognised as a victim of trafficking.
In the deportation camp, they did not ask me any story. Nobody asked me of my story, nobody.
But days away from deportation to Nigeria, Pamela discovered she was pregnant, and on these grounds only, she was given permission to stay temporarily in Italy. And only then was she finally able to tell her full story. A friend introduced her to a victim support program, and recognized by social workers as somebody who had been trafficked, she was helped to file for legal protection under Italy's anti-trafficking laws. As a result, she was granted the right to stay in the country.
Most girls that are on the road, they don't go there because they love to. They go there because madam forced them to. Instead of sending the girl back to Nigeria, they should catch the madam and take the madam to Nigeria.
Now Pamela is cooperating with the authorities to find and prosecute the woman who enslaved her. Pamela's story has a happy ending. But for Joy, who is the moral voice of those who can't speak for themselves, the fight continues.
It is happening all over the world. We shouldn't be in denial about it. If we can end the transatlantic slavery, why is this still going on? I think it's gone on far too long. That we must say no, stand up, speak out, end it, and that way we can stamp out human trafficking, this modern day slavery.